In 1979, Ridley Scott's Alien was one of the biggest hit films of the year, and of course, as a result of that, its producers wanted a sequel to capitalize off its success. However, that sequel wouldn't happen until 7 years later when James Cameron's Aliens finally hit theaters. So in the meantime, a couple Italians decided that they were just going to make their own sequel, not get permission from anybody involved in the first Alien, and just put it in theaters as Alien 2, hoping they wouldn't get sued. And believe it or not, it kinda worked. After the previously unheard of success of Star Wars in 1977, pretty much every movie studio in the world was desperately trying to get their own sci-fi hit. Lots of questionable sci-fi films got greenlit solely because of this, and one of those films was Alien. The original Alien script was actually almost sold to B-movie producer Roger Corman, but because of this new interest in sci-fi, 20th Century Fox ended up buying it instead, hiring Ridley Scott and producing the movie at a much higher budget than Corman would have, as he was known for making movies incredibly fast and incredibly cheap. Alien, though, was still a fairly low-budget film for Fox. Almost the entire film takes place inside one spaceship. There's only like 8 characters, including the alien, and there aren't any crazy fight scenes or space battles or even laser guns or anything. So the film just didn't really need that large of a budget. The simple setup of the film, that there is an alien killing people on a spaceship, along with its relatively low budget, made this film even easier to rip off than Star Wars, inspiring a wave of knockoff films, with several coincidentally even made by Roger Corman, such as 1981's Galaxy of Terror and 1982's Forbidden World, which is actually pretty solid for a cheap alien ripoff. But over on the other side of the Atlantic Ocean, far stranger things were coming out of Italy. For years, Italy was basically the knockoff movie capital of the world, and due to some incredibly loose copyright laws over there, for a few decades, Italian studios could simply steal the titles of other movies and claim that their own movies were sequels. This led to some really bizarre anomalies, such as the Django series, which consists of over 30 different films, almost all made by completely different casts and crews, really just connected in name only. Most famous for Django Unchained, Quentin Tarantino's film, which yes, is kind of connected to these. Again, they're all unofficial sequels to each other, but they're all called Django something, so it's only kind of a series. And of course, the Zombie series is the other big unofficial Italian series. This one came after Dawn of the Dead. It was released in Europe simply under the title Zombie. And then every Italian director for the next 10 years or so decided to make their own zombie movie, which led to like 5 different movies titled Zombie 3, and a mess of completely unrelated sequels, all with random, completely incomprehensible numbering and subtitles. There's also, of course, stuff like the Italian Terminator 2, which again, no relation at all. And my favorite, the Texas Chainsaw Massacre 3, in which there is not a single chainsaw, and it's also not set in Texas. So I think that just gives you a very clear picture into how accurate these Italian sequels are to the source material. But one of the strangest oddities from this time is, of course, a bizarre pseudo-sequel to Alien. The film was titled Alien 2 on Earth, or at least that's what its original Italian title translates to. The film actually got a shockingly wide release, and in many countries it was released under different titles, which again was very common for these Italian fake sequels back then. There's always like 30 different titles that you can find these things under. So of course it was first released in Italy under the original title, Alien 2 on Earth, and seems to have been released under the same title, or at least a very similar one, in Denmark, Poland, Portugal, the UK, Spain, Greece, Peru, the Soviet Union, Hong Kong, and Canada. In Brazil, it was apparently just released as Alien 2 with no subtitle. In Sweden, it was called Monster Alien 2, and in France, it was just called The Monster Attacks for some reason. In Australia, it was called Alien Terror, and in West Germany, it got the crazy title Alien: The Seed of Horror Returns. I kind of love that one. And I had a very tough time finding any details, but apparently it did get a very brief theatrical release in the United States as Alien 2 on Earth by Cinema Shares International Distribution, a company which handled the American releases of several Godzilla films and a lot of foreign horror movies. Or it at least was supposed to get a release from that company. Its release was seemingly cancelled shortly before it happened, or it was just pulled from theaters very quickly, probably because the producer-director of the film Ciro Ippolito was getting sued for it. Yeah, so of course Fox saw that a movie basically being sold as a sequel to Alien was being shown around the world, and they weren't too happy about that. Believe it or not, though, the lawsuit didn't really work out for Fox. Again, the details are a little fuzzy here, but apparently a countersuit was then presented to Fox, showing that there was a novel from the 1930s also just called Alien. So technically, Fox's Alien was ripping off that Alien, and they ended up dropping their suit against Ippolito to avoid this suit over the novel. However, I could find absolutely no information about this mysterious novel, and the only accounts of the lawsuit I could find come from the movie's IMDb trivia page and an article on Xenopedia with literally no sources cited. So I'd take this all with a grain of salt. The closest thing I've seen anybody point to as being this possible Alien novel is a short story by George O. Smith called Alien from 1945. I also should mention that there is actually a book about Ciro Ippolito, but it's unfortunately all in Italian, has not been translated to English, so I couldn't really confirm if anything comes from here, but I would assume that most of these stories that seem to have no source come from this book, but again, I can't really confirm that, unfortunately. But no matter what really happened behind the scenes, it's well known that Ippolito somehow did not actually end up getting sued for the movie, and it seemingly had no trouble staying in theaters outside the United States. But even here, just a few years later, the film was released on VHS, although under the Australian title Alien Terror, and then a few years later under another new title, this time Strangers. Although in recent years it has once again been released as Alien 2 on Earth with seemingly no copyright issues, so maybe there is some truth to that lawsuit story. But anyway, at this point you're probably wondering, what's the movie actually like? Well, it's not great, and it also has almost nothing to do with the real Alien. By 1979, Ippolito was already fairly successful in the Italian film industry, having written, produced, and even acted in several films by then, also occasionally working in theater as well. He saw Alien and how successful it was, and Zombie 2, the first unofficial sequel to Dawn of the Dead, and how successful that was, and then decided he needed to be the first guy to cash in on an unofficial Alien sequel. So he very quickly wrote a script that was set after the events of Alien, but this time on Earth. It began with a sequence where pieces of a spaceship and chunks of alien remains crash land in California, obviously meant to be the remains of the Nostromo from Alien, and the titular alien from that film. The rest of the film would then involve the alien remains infecting people, seemingly with the chest bursters we see in Alien, which would then cause fully grown xenomorphs, or legally distinct enough alien creatures, to eventually emerge in Los Angeles, attacking the population there and causing general chaos. However, after presenting the script to investors and receiving the necessary budget, Ippolito instead decided to spend a good portion of it on a new car, hookers, a vacation to Cannes, and then several unsuccessful trips to the casino. The investors were obviously not thrilled with Ippolito's choice, and he was forced to scale back the script after they refused to give him more money. Ippolito then had another major issue with the project. He was constantly fighting with the original director, Biagio Proietti, which ended with Proietti being fired. Ippolito then tried to convince classic Italian horror director Mario Bava to direct, but Bava was busy with other projects, although he did end up doing some advising for the special effects team. Ippolito ended up having to direct the film himself for the first time, although he went by the pseudonym Sam Cromwell. So with the diminished budget, stripped down script, and inexperienced director, Alien 2 ended up essentially having no resemblance to its original story, or even to the original Alien, really. The intro sequence with the parts of the Nostromo crashing down on Earth was swapped out with the much more cost-effective use of stock footage of rockets taking off, then some big boats and dudes saying over a TV broadcast that some astronauts disappeared. Then it inexplicably goes to an interview with some cave explorer who also just happens to be psychic for some reason, and then we get some bowling scenes, beach scenes, driving scenes, and a bunch of other random boring garbage just tossed in to waste time, because they no longer had the budget to show the whole city of Los Angeles getting chest bursted. So instead, our main cast is a crew of spelunkers, and they go underground because that's a much more contained area for an alien attack, and therefore much cheaper to film. When they finally do go underground, we get like 10 to 15 minutes of good stuff here, even though you don't really see the alien because the budget constraints got so bad. There was one very brief alien sighting early on when some random kid on a beach got her face eaten off after an alien egg hatched off screen, but I think that was just put in because somebody realized the movie went on for almost 45 minutes with no aliens or gore, and they had to shove something in somewhere to keep it interesting. So the first real alien sighting is when this egg the cave explorers found, which really just looks like a rock and nothing at all like the eggs from Alien, breaks open and finally an alien emerges. Now, of course, in the real Alien films, when an egg hatches, a facehugger emerges, plants itself on somebody's face, inserts the baby alien into their body, then the baby tears through the person's chest to escape into the world, where it rapidly grows into the iconic xenomorph. And here it's actually kind of similar. The egg breaks open and some kind of creature that we don't really see attacks this girl's face. Again, we don't really see the creature at all, but soon enough the rest of the gang finds her body, thinks she's still alive, again just like what happens in Ridley Scott's Alien, and when they rescue her from this hole they found her in, the alien emerges from her body. However, instead of bursting through her chest, this little guy bursts through her face in one of the only cool scenes in the movie. It causes some chaos for like 5 minutes, then it gets pretty boring again, and beyond that brief look, we never really see the alien again, except for its red tentacle arm things, and at the end we get some alien vision, when we see the protagonists from the alien's perspective. Again, this was all done because of budget constraints and actually was apparently advised by Mario Bava because he was pretty used to working with very low budgets by this point. Oh, there's also one other great point where a guy gets possessed by the alien somehow, and the psychic girl just blows his head up, which apparently she just had the ability to do the entire time and just chose not to at any other point in the movie. The film is just not very good. Again, most of it is just boring, and I've pretty much outlined anything interesting that happens. I find it to be a fascinating piece of history, but I wouldn't really recommend it to most people. However, it was apparently successful enough for Bruno Mattei, an infamous Italian schlock director, to want to make a sequel to it. Alien 3 was very briefly in development, with brothers Gaetano and Francesco Paolacci attached to the special effects. This once again would have come out before the official Alien 3, although it's unclear how far along the production got before it was canceled. This one poster was at least finished for it. As for Ippolito, he seems to be still active in the Italian film industry to this day, although his output has slowed significantly in recent years. And funny enough, when the film The Descent came out in 2005, which also depicted monsters underground killing a group of cavers, Ippolito actually tried to sue the producers, but he obviously didn't end up winning that. But that's really all there is to say about Alien 2 on Earth. It's one of those films where its existence is really a lot more interesting than the actual contents of the film. But again, I find it to be a very interesting part of movie history, and maybe you'll like it more than me if you decide to check it out.